Alright, time for another draftphysics.com, debatephysics.com, but as stated, no one will show up for the debate. So, this Wikipedia page, we're going to do some more double slit, and this probably is going to be the dumbest, biggest lie, made up, stupid section of the story they tell. So it's really, really bad science. And of course, Wikipedia will not allow you to say those words. And, they're going to force everybody to believe this crap, and everybody just supports being fed the crap, and no one will fight these crappy institutions, and it's all quite tragic. But probably, if I look in the footnotes, they are going to probably cite Veritasium even as a source of this bullshit. And, I did offer him $4,000. There's a couple people I offered $4,000 to allow this argument to be made, and publicly and, with some sort of audience debated. And they wouldn't take my money. Thunderfoot, Veritasium, there was a couple of others I offered the big money to. But anyway, so leave us move on to the horror, really. It's just the science is so bad. It's so stupid. It's so trivial. It's just so goddamn wrong. And nobody cares. And that's just really, really sad. Yeah. We live on a planet where people just don't care. All right, so let's get rid of this briefly, and we'll just illustrate the points that physicist has no clue regarding. Okay, so physicists don't know anything about the truth of the double slit experiment. So Newton did these experiments here, single opening, single impediment. Okay, and he got this same pattern. Basically, we'll create the same pattern. And it's not a wave pattern because this thing is gigantic here in the middle, and it shouldn't be. Water waves don't do that. And if you do the math to actually figure out this stuff, which Newton I don't think did, the fact is the math that works is the distance between the surfaces. Okay, it's not the opening size or any of that. It's just about surfaces. And it's about the fact that if you believe in a wave theory, you have to put the waves right on the top of the center of the wave has to be the edge of the surface, which is sort of a giveaway that, this is really just about surfaces bending the light. And so a certain number of photons are bent this way and some are bent that way. And when you add it all up, then you end up with a bunch of scatter on the screen. And this scatter has in phase and out of phase and in phase and out of phase. And there's no interference. And the double slit really gives it away. So Young's double slit was really just a single slit pattern because he made the slit so narrow that the two point sources were so close together that they couldn't create a second source. So he turned a four surface experiment into a two surface experiment because two of the surfaces were so close together. Really easy to deduce again. And what becomes obvious in the math is what are you really introducing when you put two single slits together? What are you introducing? Well, you're introducing this big distance. This distance between a surface and this distance. And that distance has a whole bunch of wavelengths in it. And for every wavelength difference, there's a new little dot. Okay, so there's a certain specific number. A certain number fit inside of here. And if you drew two lines from two of those surfaces, if I drew a line from, let me draw the line. If I drew a line from this surface at 9 degrees to this, and I drew a line from this surface, I could see is it a full wavelength answer or not? Are these two, say if one is 99.6 and the other one's 14 let's say 7, well, I'm going to end up with a remainder, okay? And so if I have a remainder here, that is, if I have a point something, then we already know this is an off over here. This has to be. So this is dictating what's going to happen here at the center. So the whole thing should be viewed on an arced screen. So that's another thing that's just, it's so obviously true that the length, the distance, should always be considered the same, and you should view the pattern on an equidistant screen. And it just tells you that you can count. You can know exactly how many of these there are. You'll know by just doing this simple math exactly how many there are going to be. There's going to be whatever the number of wavelengths are this way and this way. So you just multiply how many wavelengths fit in the distance, multiply it times 2, and you'll know exactly how many places you can have in phase, out of phase, in phase, out of phase. And obviously you're creating two patterns here. You have this big distance, and then you have these two small distances. And the smaller the distance, well, that's creating these big nodes, because in the small distance there's only so many fewer wavelengths, and so there can only be a fewer number of places that can be in phase. So you're really just saying we're going to just cast light from 4 sources, and some of the sources are going to be very close together. That means they'll just have a big blob of spread light, in phase, out of phase, in phase, out of phase, in phase, out of phase, in phase. And the other 2 sources are the distant sources, and they're going to be going in and out of phase, in phase, out of phase, in phase, making the small dots. That's it. It's really simple. So waves are nonsensical because they'd be in these silly positions, right? I mean, physics tries to tell you that Huygens says there's 2 waves going through the single slit, you know, this butt cheek thing. No, there isn't. Okay, too ridiculous. You'll get the wrong answer if you use those distances as the distances. So you have to multiply it by 2 or do something to fix Huygens, because it doesn't even work in a single slit. And it certainly doesn't work here at all, in the sense of what is this about Huygens that says you get a wave front on the corner of a surface? So that doesn't work either. But clearly this isn't a Huygens phenomenon. There's no continuous waves here, and that's a little, an infinite number of silly waves. I don't know if they're going to go into Huygens later. That ought to be entertaining. But anyway, it's so easy to deduce, okay? It's just geometry. There's nothing here. You don't have to believe in any waves, any nonsense. It's vectors of light, as we know light is. Light is rays. There's rays of light. You're spreading a whole bunch of rays across the surface, and it just happens that when 4 sources are all in phase, you get a very bright spot. When only 2 sources are in phase, it's a dull spot. Perfectly consistent with the results of the experiments. All right, so now let's go to one of the biggest lies in physics. Okay. So it says the basic, you click on this crap on the sidebar at Wikipedia, and it is just such crap. So they have a thing called background, and it says classical mechanics, and it says old quantum theory, and it has Bar-Ket notation. I mean, silly shit all over the place. Dirac nonsense, all kinds of silly crap. But anyway. All right, in the basic version of this experiment, a coherent light source. So you don't really need a coherent light source if you just back up far enough. So they don't even go into these details, but the idea is if you have a light source that's far enough away from the experiment you're doing, then the photons that are going to get to your experiment tend to be more parallel. Okay, so the further away your light source, the more parallel the light is that actually hits you. All the light that's going at an angle will miss you. So you're getting very coherent light. So that's what it's sort of arguing here. And so in the past, they just did it by saying, well, let's put the light source far away, and let's have a slit, before you get to the experiment, just to guarantee we blocked out all the light that's not going straight. All right. Such as a laser beam. So yes, laser beams make it easier, but they're not perfectly coherent. So again, they will make a sloppier pattern. Depending on the quality of the beam, will decide how much fuzziness your pattern has. Illuminates a plate, so whatever, they should say a target, okay, placed by, oh no, this is the actual slit. So instead of just saying 2 slits, right, it's called the double slit experiment. That's the title of the page. And they're going to talk about piercing. And come on. All right, anyway. Illuminates a plate pierced by 2 parallel slits. Now, that's just bad grammar, right? I mean, that doesn't describe it really, right? You can make the slits by putting a line through soot, or you can make the slits by actually cutting through a surface. And so, come on. But you cut it or something pierced. So this goes back to even Feynman. So they love Feynman. They quote Feynman here all over the place. And Feynman couldn't even draw the thing right, all right? And he called it the two-hole experiment. So, you know, how much consistency is there here? Oh, that's right, none. All right. And the light passes through the slits, is observed on a screen, okay, behind the plate. All right, so they couldn't even have a picture of that. You know, it's pretty basic. Why not just show the picture of that? All right, the wave nature of light. So this is them declaring it. We have to believe this. The wave nature of light causes the light waves passing through the two slits to interfere. So they're making a direct statement. They're not telling us what the simple truth. Why don't they just say the simple truth? When you have an impediment or when you have a surface interrupting the path of photons, you end up with a fringe pattern. They could just describe the truth, the observed facts. But instead they do this crap where they tell us we have to believe this has something to do with a wave. That something's waving through the slits. Okay, and then now they're going to interfere in some way. Okay, so they say in physics, interference is a phenomenon in which two coherent waves are combined by adding their intensities and displacements with due consideration for their phase difference. So the only thing they have is a phase difference. So all you're doing is you're throwing rocks, and there's two people throwing rocks. If they throw the rocks at the same time, the rocks hit the surface at the same time. They throw the rocks at a different timing, you know, then the rock hits, another rock hits, another rock hits. And so there's places where the two rocks hit at the same time, and you could say, yes, well, that's when you'll get a photon. But when they don't hit at the same time, they won't be a photon. Now, obviously, the photons are really requiring the frequency to be correct. They're not saying, oh, you have to hit both at the same time. Can't click anything, Gary. All right. So, interfere. Yeah, that's what we were. All right. Producing light and dark bands on the screen. Okay. I guess they could be called that, but obviously, you know, their own diagram is a little, you know, it's not perfectly bandy, but obviously you can get little dots of light, little round dots, depending on how good your laser is again and all of that stuff. You'll end up with actual dots of light, not bands of light. All right. As a result that would, okay, a result that would not be expected. Okay, so they're telling us what we would expect. They're telling us what we can imagine. Yours not allowed. You're limited to their thinking. If they didn't think of some idea, it can't have happened in the universe. They've considered everything. They thought of everything, and they've ruled out everything but their little pet Holy Ghost explanation. So you're talking about details, facts that are really thin, okay? It was a very foggy night, and they saw a lump move across. Okay, from house to house or something, you know, and it's just about dissecting what that lump is, and they're telling us we can't believe it's anything other than, yes, the Holy Ghost was on the prowl. Okay, the results that would not be expected if light consisted of classical particles. So again, it is clearly easy to expect it. So this guy says so, we have to believe so. This guy says so, we have Feynman, 1965. In the silliest lecture, frankly, on the subject of the double slit there is out there. I mean, it's so sloppy, it's so stupid, and it just makes up experiments that never ever happened. And this is what they put on the science page on the internet. The number one result on Google for this phenomenon. This is the crap you'll be taken to, and it's crap. All right. It's just... All right, so obviously a classical view can figure it out. And like I said, Newton did almost everything, but yeah, he didn't go through a whole bunch of arguments about why there's fringe patterns. But clearly you can understand there's electrons on the surface of a slit. You can understand that if light is passing a surface, it's going to hit those electrons. and that it's quite possible that in encountering electrons that the direction of the light would be changed. Either a new photon would be created in a new direction, or that the photon, the energy, would be just deflected. Not hard to imagine at all. Okay. Not hard for classical physics to speculate. However, the light is always found to be absorbed at the screen at discrete points. So this is where they do their, oh, but we're just so amazed that, our wave theory turns into a wavical theory, because the light doesn't land as a wave. It doesn't land everywhere. It only lands in one place. Yeah, duh. A single photon can't go everywhere. Yes, that's true. Oh, anyway, as individual particles, not waves. So they're just creating a fake duality, and then their resolution is to say, well, so what? We'll just stick the two words together and have wavicles. All right. The interference pattern appears via varying density of these particle hits on the screen. So they're just basically saying that, yes, as the light, you could add the light up. So if you put a piece of photographic paper, it'll start off really dim, and then it'll get brighter and brighter and brighter and brighter. The more photons you allow to create the pattern, the more pattern you will see. So nothing big, no big surprise there. Furthermore, versions of the experiment. So right here is just a lie. I mean, it's just a lie. I mean, they got to know there's no source for any of this. So they're talking explicitly about photons here. Furthermore, versions of the experiment that include detectors at the slits. So this isn't a thing. There's no such thing as a detector experiment. It can't happen. Especially detectors at the slits. You cannot put a detector at the slit. Any idiot could imagine what kind of detector would I put at the slit? How do I detect a photon without stopping it? Oh, that's right. I can't detect a photon without stopping it. There's no theory for that. Okay. Find that each detected photon. See? I mean, just amazing. Just absolute nonsense. I don't know whether we should read this. Definition of a photon. A photon is an elementary particle. A photon is a composite object. It is made of light quanta, bits of quanta, okay, at a frequency. Is an elementary particle, so it's not. That is a quantum of the electromagnetic field. Bullshit. Okay, including electromagnetic radiation such as light and radio waves. So again, just more, we're going to force you to be stuck in our jargon. We've decided to call it something 150 years ago, and we're just going to keep calling it that, even though it's the wrong answer. And the force carrier for the electromagnetic force. So they used electromagnetic 3 times in 2 sentences. Photons are massless. So another declaration. They're telling us it doesn't have any mass, and yet the stuff pushes. The stuff creates heat. The stuff obviously has momentum. And they're just pretending it has momentum without having any mass. Just a nonsense statement. So they always move at the speed of light. Well, why don't they move faster than that if they're so light that they don't weigh anything at all? Why don't they move faster? Oh, God. Just so bad. All right. So each photon. So this is the detector. Again, this never happened. This experiment never happened. There's no such thing as the detector experiment for photons especially. And you can't do it for anything, frankly. Your effort to detect will destroy the path of the object. Duh. It's just so stupid. I mean, in their definition of a photon as a massless object, right? I can't even shoot photons at an electron because the fact is the photons do have momentum and they will push the electron. All right, anyway. Furthermore, versions of the experiment, so these are non-existent versions, completely made up versions of the experiment that we never did, we just made up in our imagination, and we decided what the results of the experiment was. And that's exactly what Feynman did in his video. He just made up a story about, well, what if there were detectors? It wasn't a story about reality. All right, furthermore, versions of the experiment that include detectors at the slits find that each detected photon, so this is Dr. Quantum, it's that bad. So a religious organization that made up a fake version of quantum mechanics, that's what they put in the Wikipedia page. All right. Slits find that each detected photon never happened, passes through one slit. Okay. Now, I think any imbecile could figure out that the photons have to go through one slit. That they don't stop and go backwards and then go through both slits in some sort of retarded way. Well, people know you really aren't smart enough to know that, because there's actually a legitimate physicist who actually think that happens. That the photon goes through one slit and then it backtracks and then goes through the other slit too. Oh, fuck. I hate this planet. Anyway, photon passes through one slit as would a classical particle. All right, so let's read this again for coherency. All right. Furthermore, versions of the experiment that include detectors at the slits find that each detected photon passes through one slit, as it would in a classical particle, and not through both slits, as would a wave. So again, even the fact that they think that the photon has a waveness that would go through both slits, they somehow think a photon is this giant. I mean, photons are big, like 500 atoms, but they're not big enough to get through two slits. A single photon can't go through both slits. It's even if it was a wave, it couldn't do that. A laser beam is not going everywhere. I mean, isn't that obvious enough to you that the photons can't possibly be wavetons going in all directions? How could I possibly make a laser beam if it was going everywhere? If it could go through both slits, why is the laser beam a little dot? How is the little dot going to go through both slits when the little dot is smaller than the slit opening? How is that possible? I mean, it's just so stupid. Oh. Anyway, all right, a wave. All right, so now however. So we have another however. Okay. However, such experiments didn't never happen. So they have such experiments as a link. So I don't know. And it links to double slit experiment. Which way? Oh, here we go. So now they're going to do the experiment with 17 mirrors and little black boxes and all kinds of bullshit, and say that proves something. All right. Anyways, however, such experiments. So they're saying that experiment puts a detector after the slit and detects whether there's a photon, when they don't do any such thing. So again, this is such a deception. There's just lies and deceptions everywhere. However, such experiments demonstrate that particles do not form the interference pattern. So all the particles have to do is be in phase or out of phase. So obviously if they're scattered from these points and they're going to travel different path lengths, all kinds of different distances, then the SOS code, right? Let's just think of it as an SOS code. Each point source is going to send an SOS code. And all you're saying is are the SOS code, is the ... going to show up in sequence? Or is it out of sequence? That's what phase means. Okay. All right. Do not form the interference pattern if one detects which slit they pass through. So again, it's just a lie. All right. Feynman described an experiment that never happened. It doesn't exist. It wasn't anywhere. It was just a thought experiment, and they made up the outcome. They decided what would happen. They decided it was only possible that a certain outcome was possible. And so that's what they described is the limits of their imagination, nothing else. It has nothing to do with science. It has to do with him making up a story. These results demonstrate the principle of wave-particle duality. So let's read this pile of crap. Okay, wave-particle duality is the concept in quantum mechanics that they are fools and idiots, and instead of finding and searching for the right answer, decided to just marry two really bad ideas. Okay, that quantum entities exhibit particle or wave properties depending on what day it is. So on, yes, Thursdays, Fridays, Saturdays, they are particles, and on Sunday, Monday, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays, they are waves. According to the experimental circumstances, so according to what they would prefer it to be for the particular experiment they do, they would just decide what they're going to, they'll decide on a fundamentally different description of the elemental function. The elemental function is completely fudgeable. They can make the elemental, they can change the blocks from being square to being round. They can change the structure of the whole concept of physics to suit their experiment. It expresses the inability of the classical concept. So there's no inability. The inability is they didn't think of it, therefore it can't possibly exist. That's all they're saying to you constantly. I didn't think of it. I'm really smart. You're really stupid. Ha ha ha. They're not saying anything here. There's no inability. You never even tried. They never even tried to make a classical model work. It expresses the inability of the classical concepts such as particle or wave to fully describe. So of course particles can fully describe. So it's just a lie, frankly. I mean, you're lying to say it can't. You never tried, you never looked, you won't listen to the argument, so fuck. It's just such bullshit. All right, other atomic scale entities such as electrons are found to exhibit, so are found, it's kind of a vague little statement, isn't it? We are found them to do that when, we did certain experiments, the same behavior when fired towards a double slit. So this reference is obviously crap also. Additionally, the detection of individual discrete impacts is observed to be inherently probabilistic. So inherently probabilistic. So you can't possibly suggest that, no, it's just random at the point sources. And yes, it's going to end up being probabilistic where there's going to be more photons and less photons because it's harder to bend them a lot. They bend a little a lot, and they bend a lot a little. Yeah. Oh, fuck. It's just such garbage. This is such junk science. Additionally, the detection of individual discrete impacts is observed to be inherently probabilistic, which is inexplicable using classic mechanics. So they're basically saying, I can't describe to you the fact that you create an initial condition of, dots on dice, and that there ends up being a probabilistic outcome to how those dots will match up. So this pattern is completely understandable as the combination of two different distances from light sources. So if I put light sources at these different, it's all I have to do. I can duplicate the pattern by just putting light sources at the distances. All right, if the lights are, let's say, red and green. So I put the red light at the small distance, and I put the green light at the further distance. And the fact is, you'll see colors that will represent the fact that the two sources are producing photons that are hitting the surface. Now, I can't duplicate the phase shifts that way, but I'm just saying there's ways for you to detect that, yes, this is really quite easy to figure out. It's just a vector. You make the line longer, you've broken your SOS code. Okay, it's showing up at the wrong time. Your frequency is showing up out of phase. Not complicated. I mean, if they were bullets and you were shooting them from a gun, and the simple truth was if only one bullet hits the stick doesn't tip. Okay, it just wobbles if one bullet hits. But if two bullets hit, the stick flips down. All right, so that would be the experiment. Then you can understand that, yes, from you scattering the bullets with a machine gun from the 4 point sources, the places where the stick falls down is going to be these little dots. And the places where they're just wobbling is going to be in between the little dots. And this place here is going to be nothing. There's not going to be anything happening there. You know, lots of ways to tease the truth out of this little knot. And they didn't try to untie the knot. They just cut the string. All right. It's just terrible. All right, the experiment can be done with entities much larger than electrons. So again, if you analyze those experiments, complete bullshit. All right. And photons, although it becomes more difficult as size increases, whatever more difficult means is a statement. The largest entities for which double slit experiment has been confirmed were molecules, and each comprised of 2,000 atoms with a total mass of 2,500 atomic units. And it's just a says so, that it was successful in some way, or there's something to view there. So this is almost like the Eddington experiment. We'll just give them a vague notion that they did the experiment and somehow it worked. But it's just this vague notion. And we'll just ignore the fact that the guy who did the experiment said, I wouldn't stake my life on these results. All right, so just more mush. All right, the double slit experiment and its variations, whatever that means, has become a classic for its clarity. So again, they're saying it clearly points to this wave stuff when no, Young's drawings don't match these patterns. So Young didn't draw these patterns. All right, this isn't what he saw, quote unquote. All right, and clearly it doesn't work mathematically unless you understand the math is always about what's happening at a surface. That's the math that works, the surface math. Surfaces. The surfaces are causing the effect. That's what's clear, crystal clear. As clear as a scientific idea can get almost is that the surfaces are causing the effect. Anyway, the double slit experiment and its variations has become a classic for its clarity in expressing the central puzzles of quantum mechanics. So isn't that just a piece of rhetoric? Oh, it's just part of the lovely storytelling. It provides this wonderful background. You know, we start the book by talking about how tall the trees are and how misty the air was and the little dwarfs and the smurfs and the gremlins. Yes, we're going to talk about dwarfs and smurfs and gremlins in this lovely background of cobblestones. Okay, because it demonstrates the fundamental limitation of the ability of, there's Feynman, of the observer to predict experimental results. So amazing. Amazing that they would say something like that, that's would have some fundamental limitation. There's no fundamental limitation to analyzing the experiment. It's just that they won't bother analyzing the experiment. They're not interested of these details. This double maxima, they're not interested. The fact that there's two patterns here, they're not interested. All right. Okay, results. Richard Feynman called it the phenomenon which is impossible to explain in any classical way. Impossible. I mean, this is their arrogance. They never tried in the first place, right? And they're presuming that nobody, could take a few hours even and just draw it and then say, well, I see these obvious defects in what they're saying. I mean, the waves don't do this. And waves certainly don't do this. With two slits, waves don't do anything like this. So why am I stuck in some sort of wave psychology? Now, the irony is Feynman didn't really think photons were waves. He overtly said they weren't waves. The thing don't work that way. That's what he said. So it is kind of funny. But that's why Feynman believed in complete mush. He believed every single photon that went through the slit got randomized. It went in some new direction. And you can kind of just look at the experiment and know, obviously, that can't be true. This bright spot is 97% of the light. 97% of the light goes straight through the single slit. Why would I think that every single photon is getting bent when 97% of them land here in the middle? Come on. Too ridiculous. It's just so depressing. Oh, okay, in any classical way, and which has in its the heart of the quantum mechanics. So this is the okay. In reality, it contains the only mystery of quantum mechanics. I don't know. This quote is written with pieces in, pieces out, dot dot dots in there. I mean, what's the dot 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 for? Yeah, well, the woman I'm sleeping with currently. Oh yeah, well, she is a student. Yeah, what was the dot dot dot? She told me. That's what she thinks. I mean, this is such bad physics. So bad. Well, at least here we have a couple of decent images. So again, you I'm sorry, but you people can't figure out. First off, this single slit pattern really is a lie, right? Because we know in the single slit, this is going to be really, really bright here in the center. All right, anyway. If light consisted strictly of ordinary or classic particles, and these particles were fired in a straight line through a slit and allowed to strike a screen on the other side, we would expect to see a pattern corresponding to the size and the shape of the slit. And guess what? If you took that sentence seriously, then you would say, well, obviously Feynman didn't understand this experiment at all. Because let me draw what Feynman drew. So he just says the size and the shape corresponding to the size and the shape of the slit. So this is one of the biggest mistakes they make in not even getting simple mechanics right. I mean, this isn't complicated mechanics. This is really simple mechanics, and they can't get it right. All right. So you're gonna shoot a pattern from a distance. Now your slits are 1 millimeter apart. Okay, so I can't even, they're really small on this diagram, and you're going to make a pattern that's a foot across. Okay. Now the first thing, Professor Lewin would always say it's non-negotiable that the middle here has to be in phase, because this line is going to be the same as this line, but that line is inside of a millimeter. Okay, it's not the pattern. The pattern is huge compared to that 1 millimeter. Now, if you're going to correspond to the size and the shape of the slits, then you would expect, if I'm sending light through these slits, that all I'm going to get is 2 little tiny little lumps, right? But it's a millimeter apart, right? So if I'm going to say the light is spreading and it's going to create big humps, well, the 2 big humps would have to be just 1 millimeter apart, right? The first slit, if I open the first slit, the pattern is here. If I open the second slit, the pattern will be just 1 millimeter different. Just 1 millimeter. That's it. Okay, just 1 millimeter different. The 2 would be right on top of each other. There would just be 1 millimeter of difference between them if I was going to argue they spread. Now, they're not supposed to spread, frankly, so they should be just 2 little dots 1 millimeter apart. But if we're going to argue that the light is spreading, because there are surfaces, right, you really can't get rid of the surface problem. But if you're going to take away the whole idea that the surfaces were causing the light to bend, diffract, come out crooked, okay, if you took that away, then they should be 1 millimeter apart, really tiny. Or if you say, okay, I can't get rid of the fact that the light's going to spread, then the 2 humps would never be here and here. Okay, this slit won't make the lump over here, and this slit does not make a lump over here. They're just a millimeter difference. So they can't even get that simple geometry right. That's how little attention they've paid to the experiment. They haven't drawn it, they haven't analyzed it, they haven't sitting there with a piece of paper and looked at it and figured out what is possible and impossible. They just made up this fake wooey theory and then said everybody has to believe in our Jesus. We made up a perfectly good Jesus story, you have to believe it, or we'll insult you. All right. So bad. All right, so it says right there, to see a pattern corresponding to the size and shape of the slits. Okay, so that's what they're claiming, and obviously that doesn't happen especially the way Feynman drew it. However, when this single slit experiment is actually performed, the pattern on the screen is a diffraction pattern. Well, that's not true either. Okay. Diffraction is the interference of bending of waves around the corners of obstacles through an aperture into the region of the geometrical shadow of the obstacle aperture. The diffracting object or aperture effectively becomes, okay, so blah, 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 blah. Yeah, the whole point is that surfaces cause light to change its direction. So that's the diffraction part. So where are they saying that doesn't happen with classical objects? I mean, yeah, it's classical in the sense that you've got to talk about what happens with light, okay? We're not talking about throwing baseballs through slits. We're talking about throwing photons through a surface covered in electrons. I mean, it's really easy to, imagine the experiment at one level different. Okay, it's not baseballs through hard materials. There's no such thing as a surface, that's flat atomically. I mean, their own physics says so. There's no surface that has protons on the surface, right? The only thing on a surface is electrons. You can't have a surface made of anything other than electrons. Okay, I mean, too stupid. All right, so where was it? Okay, in which the light is spread out. The smaller the slit, the greater the angle of spread. That just means that, another obvious point would be, I mean, this is something, Newton did observe. I mean, you're making when you make the aperture smaller, what's happening percentage-wise to the light, right? Now, the fact is the way they're saying that, it's wrong, right? So let me just, the greater the angle of spread. Okay, that part's right, but the number of photons is decreasing. It's getting dimmer and dimmer and dimmer because there's less surface area. But you can understand that the odds of you being near the slit, if the hole is this big and I'm just randomly through, you could say, yeah, I could go here, I could go here. Yes, I'm not very likely to be next to the surface. But if I make the hole very small, well, then the likelihood that you're going to pass by the surface goes way up. So isn't that just a duh statement? How could it come out any other way? Of course, the amount of spreading light is going to increase if you force the light next to a surface. If none of the light can get through the hole without hitting the surface, well, then all of the light will be bent. The top portion of the image shows the central portion of the pattern formed when a red laser illuminates a slit. And so again, they won't talk about the fact that that central maxima is twice as big. Why is it twice as big? Waves won't do that. If one looks carefully, see, and they talk about looking carefully. Why would I look carefully? All right? You people aren't interested in a careful look. Okay. Two faint size bands. So he's saying there that the single slit can create 100 bands. I've made one myself where there was 70 little dots. 70. And they always show this. They always show the one that's just one big blob and one little blob on either side. You can have 70 little blobs. 70. Because they're forcing the facts to meet their theory. They're not letting the facts point to the truth. They're going to bend the facts and distort the facts to force them into the package that is their Bugs Bunny. All right. More bands can be seen with a more highly refined apparatus. Well, isn't that nice of them? You don't need a refined apparatus, right? So that's just a lie. All you need is a bigger opening. So as you make the opening bigger, you increase the number of wavelengths of light that fit inside the opening. When you make the number of wavelengths of light that fit inside the opening, you make more places where there is a full wavelength of difference in the length of the line. The more distance, the more places there's a phase shift. Oh, God, they're so stupid. All right. So there's no more bands can be seen with a more highly refined apparatus. So just absolute nonsense. You don't need any highly refined apparatus. Just stick a needle in front of the laser. Diffraction explains the pattern as being the result of the interference of light waves from the slit. So just bullshit. All right. So we'll read this little thing up here, and I guess we'll say this is where we'll pick it up next time. All right, same double slit assembly, 0.7 millimeters between the slits. Now, we don't know what between the slits means. One of them is a single slit, right? So they're saying between the surfaces, and what surface are they talking about? So again, you can't even get accurate numbers from these people. The top image, one slit is closed. In the single slit image, so they're taking a double slit with a total, I think, distance. So the two furthest portions of the slit are 0.7 millimeters. All right, so it's pretty wide that way, but we don't know what the size of the opening to the impediment is. And they close one of them, and they have a single slit pattern. And then they open, and they get a double slit pattern. Now that's just too duh, right? You start with two sources really close to each other, and then you have four sources with an outside distance that's the full 7 millimeters. And that full 0.7 millimeters is creating those little bars. All right, so let's see. In the single slit image, a diffraction pattern, a faint spot on either side of the main band. So again, they're talking about it as if it's something different. So Professor Lewin overtly states in his lectures that there's no such thing as diffraction versus interference patterns. It's all Huygens, and it's all caused by the same effect. And they're trying to imply that there's the single slit pattern is caused by something called diffraction, and somehow the double slit pattern is created by some sort of interference. All right. The faint spot on either side of the main board forms due to the non-zero width of the slit. So what does that even mean, the non-zero width of the slit? I mean, the point is if I make the slit really close together, right? And there's no wavelengths that can fit in here. Like the wavelength of the light is, say, 500 nanometers. And I put the two surfaces at 500 nanometers. Now there are no places where there is in phase and out of phase. I can't draw a full wavelength of difference between those two lines forever. I could go for infinity, and I still won't have a wavelength of difference between this point and this point, because the bottom of the triangle is too small. The hypotenuse can't be a different length because the bottom of the triangle is too fucking small. Oh, Jesus. The diffraction pattern is also seen in the double slit image. So whatever that, so they're calling the envelope pattern a diffraction pattern, and then they're calling the little dots something else. Clearly absolute bullshit. They just made it up. They don't have any good reason to believe that, and it's just plain nonsense. Let's see, but with many smaller interference fringes. Okay, so they're calling the single slit diffraction fringes, and they're calling the double slit diffraction fringes on top of interference fringes, right? Just nonsense. They just made that shit up, and it's just plain nonsense. All right. So, ooh, there we have a wave picture. Oh, and they'll talk about Newton a little bit. Well, that'll be nice. Yeah, a little bit about Newton. Anyway, I'm just so depressing. It's so depressing to exist on this planet. You're all very disappointing, I must say. You know, and it's not, the problem is there's not much you all here. So I'm sure if people were forced into this argument and they had to realize that everything, all their notions, all of this was absolute bullshit. They would have some empathy for my position here. But that'll only happen in hindsight. You know, who knows how many people threw stones through Galileo's windows? You know, the townspeople. Ooh, he's that evil Galileo. Ooh, the evil atheist. Ooh, the evil, talking shit about God. Yeah. So besides his house arrest or him not being able to communicate with the world and talk to the world anymore, which is just like you want to try to imitate what it's like to be Galileo. Well, buy yourself a domain name and build yourself a website, and then attempt to make some changes at Wikipedia, and you'll find out that, well, Google doesn't index your website because you're not saying what Google wants to hear, and you don't have ads on it. You didn't buy any ads from Google, so your website's invisible, and you will not be allowed to make any arguments anywhere, and you can't even bribe them to the debating table. So it's all very hard, very difficult, and very tragic for mankind. You know, you're all clock stoppers. You're all in the wayers. You're all liars. You're all cheaters. It's just ew. Earth is not a nice place. So, till the next time, and so forth and whatnot, I guess. The whole page is just bullshit. How many facts have we really run across on this page so far? Yeah, I can't think of any. Yeah, okay. So, till the next time and such, and so forth and whatnot.